thank you very much. And I'd also like to acknowledge a lot of people that helped me with this study. Dr. Zhang for his help for our data analysis. So our study looked at sliders or tensioners. And so if we look at, from a background perspective here, if we look at neurodynamic evidence, we see that there are a number of neurodynamic interventions that are helpful in a number of conditions. And that's just to name a few, but we have seen neurodynamic intervention across a number of interventions now. But the problem is, if we look at the best practice evidence, we really don't know much about how to apply them. What techniques might work best, the dosing of those techniques, the frequency of those techniques, self-application versus manual practitioner. So essentially we decided to pick a battle here, and we decided to compare sliders and tensioners, and we compare them in asymptomatic individuals. And sliders and tensioners have initially been discussed by Butler and Chapman and others, and we look at the literature, we know that sliders and tensioners move the nerve differently, but we don't necessarily know what that means from a patient management perspective. All right? And just so we're all on the same page, a tensioner puts tension on the nerve at both ends, or a slider takes the tension off at one end. And these have been called varying things in the literature. So in addition to comparing the slider and tension techniques in asymptomatic individuals, we also were just curious about pain pressure threshold. Pain pressure threshold has been looked at frequently in the literature as a pain modification measure, specifically spinal manipulation. So we were curious if some of our neurodynamic mobilizations would have similar effects to our other manual therapy effects. So essentially, we took 57 healthy participants, recruited most of them college students. We took baseline measurements in which we performed pain pressure threshold at 3 locations. We performed pain pressure threshold at the C5-6 facet, at the lateral epicondyle, and the tibialis anterior. We did this all on the dominant side, and all those points were chosen based on previous manipulation studies. So we tried to kind of correlate the spots that we picked. So then, after baseline measures were taken and individuals were screened for full upper extremity range of motion, we then performed the upper limb tension test. We used a couple modifications for the test, including maximal shoulder depression, as well as a subjective stopping point of the patient telling us when they would not want us to go any further. We did a reliability study within this study that showed that to be a reliable procedure for performing the test. So we did that. After that, subjects were allocated to perform either a slider or a tensioner. The dose we chose was a 1-minute dose with a 1-minute rest in between, and they performed 3 sets. And then they returned to the examination room where measures were repeated. Subjects were then asked to perform the selected intervention one more time over a 24-hour period, and then they were returned for baseline measurements over 48 hours. So essentially what we found was there was no between-group difference between the sliders and tensioners in terms of range of motion, but there were statistically significant within-group changes with both techniques, both being very similar. As far as pain pressure threshold, we didn't see a statistically significant change in most of our measures. The slider on the tibialis anterior didn't test out to be statistically significant, but what we did see that we thought was mildly interesting, at least, was a trend towards all of the pain pressure threshold measurements being a little bit higher. But like I said, it wasn't a statistically significant number, so we can't really say that for sure. So basically, in conclusion, the results indicate that sliders and tensioners may have similar effects. We've seen this across some of our other manual therapy interventions, obviously. So the study did not suggest a difference between the two, but perhaps we may be able to modulate neuromobility and potentially pain. So there are obviously a couple limitations with a study like this when we talk about extrapolating this data to our patient populations. First of all, asymptomatic versus symptomatic is clearly a big limitation of this study. And another limitation is we really didn't have a control group in this design, and in hindsight, I wish we had. It just became it was difficult to control for moving the upper extremity and not moving the nerve in some degree. So in hindsight, we would have liked to control for that. Another thing that we would have liked to control for was testing the other side. We didn't do that, so that would have been really nice because there's been some evidence on contralateral effects of mobilization. So future research just on neurodynamics. We'd just like to see a lot of research done on dosing and a little bit more on practice implication on these techniques. And we also would like to take this eventually to a patient, obviously a patient population, and then look at if there are certain characteristics that we can identify within that patient population that maybe would give us some guidance about using a slider or a tensioner technique. So at this point, really, we would advocate based on this that clinical reasoning still ultimately is the decision maker here, and you might want to consider both, but you're ultimately going to have to see how your patient responds to each technique when you make that